Welcome to Conversations with Life. This is the last of our series in this season on group fields, on working with groups and feeling with groups. And this last one I think we're going to devote to, I don't know, maybe a little bit of like troubleshooting or thinking about some of the process in fields and the ways that we can hold that better, regardless of the level of field or how we're holding it. What are some of the things that on a practical basis and maybe in a larger sense can help us to be coherent, can help us to feel into and work with the groups on all levels that we're associated with or that we find ourselves in. So what do you make of it? What do we need to know?
Well, I think one of the biggest questions that I've been sitting with in my personal process that I think it, potentially could be tapping into a larger process is, what is the definition of responsibility? And does that change when we realize ourselves as a part of a larger field?
Mm-hmm.
And if we're realizing ourselves as a part of a larger field that's still largely mysterious, how do we orient responsibly to that? And I feel like I'm just deep in that question. Like, I feel like we have some definitions of responsibility that are, kind of historic or maybe even patriarchal. And then we have something that feels like it's emerging as we realize ourselves as a part of a galactic body or a galactic field. So yeah, I'm just sitting with that, especially because of some of the experiences I've had recently, where I feel like I did some irresponsible things, and really had to sit in that question, because I also felt like I was kind of being called by something bigger to make those choices, and my reality is that I went too far. Like, fucked up, and I have to now be with those consequences. And I also am holding the possibility that, like, I still just don't know entirely what called me into that, and what was truth and what was trauma, and what was a larger group field, and what was just my magical thinking gone unhinged.
Mm-hmm.
And what am I responsible for? And I think this, ties in a little bit to where we were in our last episode, where, Keith was like, well, there's no way I can know how many layers and levels and dimensions, this goes out and that I'm affecting. And so, like, that just makes me want to come back in and, like, okay, I'm responsible for this. And I think that's a really valid exploration.
Yeah, and it strikes me as you're talking that to some degree this is like conservatism versus whatever else there is. I don't want to say liberalism because I don't know if that describes it, but conservatism means I know my group, I know myself, and I'm going to set strict limits on what that group can be and do, so that the group can cohere. Well, and to some degree, that's great. It's a container. But those limits tend to not honor the way that a field can grow and change and evolve us. Mm-hmm. So as we grow and change and evolve in any group, I mean, it's like your family field. You're supposed to grow out of that one.
Right.
Not grow out of it entirely. Your family will be your family. I hope my kids are my friends my whole life, but certainly the way that we held that, because of the way that field naturally morphs and moves. But things like nations and cities and friends groups and all shift and change. And I think the point of a group is that we go to a different place together. You know, we work together to improve each member, right? One of the things that we need to do there is take risk. Like, we need to risk. And to some degree, to the level in which a group can support any member in risking and support them in feedback and process and holding when it fails, is the degree that group has the capacity to bring something through or to create real growth and understanding and peace. And you know what I mean?
Totally. And I think that absolutely is something I feel like I learned by not doing it that way. And it also reinforces a kind of like theory that I've been working with around nurture and growth happening organically when there's enough resource. Like, you're naturally going to grow into the next container and into the next phase, and it doesn't have to be this, I have to get abused in order to grow. And I think that was the thing for me, is that like I actually knew this stuff, like about being resourced and ready, and then having the support and aftercare and whatever. Like, I know those things just from my work with studying trauma, is that like an adverse event doesn't register in the system as trauma if the person has the support to process and deal with it after it happens. And that the trauma is actually from them not having the support afterwards, more so than the actual event that happened. And so yeah, it's really interesting to like do this thing where it was risky. And I feel like one of the things that I've really tried to provide for my kids is a home and an environment where they can learn safely, where they can take risk, and there's like a safety net of like, I have my eye on you, so you're not going to do any major or permanent damage to yourself or other people. And I'm also going to let you go as far as you possibly can within, that holding.
Yeah, it's so hard to say that, this whole experience you had was a mistake. It's so hard.
You can never say that about anything.
It's so hard to say that was a problem, because you're responding in service, in desire to serve a larger field. We're experimenting with non-hierarchical process. That's one of the experiences that we want to have, and that I think the Earth needs to create in order to unfuck itself. Right? Like, hierarchy no longer serves in so many ways, right? Or at least imposed hierarchy, right? So you're in that exploration. So in a way, like, that whole experience was like, well, this was fucked up. This was beautiful. And then it's the kind of education and the experience that you can't get anywhere else. It creates wisdom. But you're right. Like, was it irresponsible? In the way of thinking,
Right.
Was it an honest risk? From my perspective, yeah. So it's really interesting to try to parse that. Teaching's a really good example of this, because I've seen teachers, and I've tried to do experiments in education. You have a class, and the government wants you to think there's one way to teach children. To teach children, you read the textbook, you teach these particular standards, and then the thing will be completed, right? And that's just such a bullshit view of education. A class is a living being, and it has like its own process happening, whatever. And sometimes you're a teacher. You're seeing things and opportunities that you could have. My friend Steve Fife, for instance, decided one year he was going to do a completely democratic class because he'd read.
Sorry, I know 5. I know the school. I'm like, that went well. That That's the new model idea.
He had read Summerhill and fell in love with it, right? It's great stuff if you encounter that and you're sensing something in education. So he's like, I'm just going to completely... So I had a meeting every morning. All the kids got to decide, and it was just absolute shit show. And like, he knew it, right? But I loved that. And I think even the kids, even though it was a shit show, I think the kids that were in that class had a valuable lessons like, oh, we're not mature enough to really make this a quality experience. We can't do this. And what Steve learned, I think, I don't know, you have to ask Steve, but what I think it was the lesson from my observation is that structure does not create the freedom that you need to give children freedom. You can't isolate yourself here and say, this is the free zone. You know, and I learned that in the man class thing that I tried to run. It was absolutely disaster. It ended up me getting fired. You know, like all of this, you just learn that you can't give people more responsibility than they're ready to handle. You know, a field watches that and sees. And in a way, true hierarchy is a process of being capable of holding responsibility. I think that's what makes somebody worth following. You know, we got it backwards, mostly in our society, where people are vying for responsibility so then they can move up there. They can move up the thing so they can feel important about themselves. But like true capacity hierarchy is, I want to follow people who are showing me that they can hold responsibility, and part of that means that they're willing to take risks. If they're not willing to take risks, I don't think they're really responsible. I don't think they're really doing it. I think they're just holding the fort and enforcing the status quo, in which there's no evolution and no learning.
Mm-hmm. And also, there's a line there of educated risk, a measured risk. What's the worst case scenario?
Yeah.
And is it worth it? Are we ready for the worst case scenario? And if we're not, what do we need to do to get ready for the worst case scenario? Because I think that's also irresponsible. It's irresponsible to, lead a group of people into a battle that's you're not resourced for. Especially if it's not an imminent, they're not knocking at your door. It's well, let's have some logic. Let's have some measuring. Let's have some, some building of the fortress. So that when things do fall apart, because they always will when there's an expansion into a bigger container, we don't lose the whole show.
Yeah, you and I have a friend, Soch, that takes big risks that doesn't necessarily hold that well sometimes. From my perspective, maybe not, maybe so. I don't know, judgment, whatever. But there seems to be the capacity in the want to do these big things, but somehow at some level the inability to be with it, in a responsible way. And that begs the question: responsible to what? What is the thing, what is the principle that a group works around? And is there a set of principles or a principle or an idea that makes a group run well when it's held? And I think we've actually answered this question, but I think we did it in the first one. But and then I think we said life. It's attuned. All good group fields are attuned to life. They're listening to the center, and life is held as the teacher in the center. But sometimes I wonder, and I really honor the way that some people take wild risks that aren't responsible. I'm okay with that. And if everybody did that all the time, it would be absolute chaos and nuttiness, and somebody's got to hold down.
Yeah, and who cleans up the mess?
Uh-huh.
Who takes care of the children and the people that got, abandoned, abused, neglected in the process of an irresponsible risk?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good question.
Is it responsible for a father to do extreme sports or skydiving or something like that, where just for the thrill of it, they're putting their life on the line?
That's a good question.
And if that doesn't go well, you now have a huge gap in multiple lives.
Or, what about the father who goes out to defend his country and dies there? Is that responsible?
Mm-hmm.
And does the responsibility to the country trump the responsibility to his family, right? You look at that and you say, without all of the soldiers, let's say, let's make it really, really simple. Let's say someone bad invaded American soil, actually, right? Physically. If people didn't stand up to defend the country and go to war, the risk is that we're going to lose all of our freedom, right? But one man not risking it because he's a father probably wouldn't change the outcome, but 10,000 men thinking that same way would. So now we're looking at conflicting responsibilities that may or may not be greater than the one that's originally. This is why I just will be an alien in a foreign country and worry about this issue ever.
For sure. Way to call that in.
Yeah. I am an alien and all the things.
Yeah, it's a tough question, and my reality is that I sat in the jungle for 6 weeks in this question. In a pretty horrible situation. That I still don't know, was this the best thing I've ever done or the worst thing I've ever done?
But the scary, crazy, beautiful thing is you'll never know, and it doesn't matter, right? Whatever it is, eventually you're going to be like, that led me to this, right? I look at my situation, I got bored one day and decided to go to Utah and throw my life away to go over here, right? That could have been the biggest mistake of my life, but I kind of love that I did it, you know? And then the other piece of that too is looking back at yourself and being like, well, do I regret that choice? And I think to myself, you know what? I can't regret that choice because it was the only possible choice that Keith was capable of making. And I know that because it's the choice to be made. So there is no other version of me. There is no other circumstances that exist in my timeline and reality that could have made a different choice. So the same thing would go for the choice that you've made. There's no point in regretting because at the time, that was your best option and your only option. Kind of retroactively defeats free will, maybe.
Yeah, and I get that, and I also there's a part of me that's just red flags on stuff like that because that a similar argument could be used to justify abuse.
Oh, you know what? I was wondering why we weren't having.
No, I took my mic off.
Let's get that fixed.
Was Steve's picking mine up?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, enough.
Thanks, babe. And so I'm always kind of dancing with that because I'll take stuff like that all the way down a dark road and be like, that logic could justify some pretty bad shit.
Yeah, so, right.
And then there's also a part of me that's like, okay, I went through this horrible thing. I want to learn something from this, and I actually don't want to invite other people into that kind of situation again. That was one of the hardest things for me, was that I was holding a level of, projected or real responsibility, and people were looking to me as a facilitator, and I was entirely out of a capacity to do that. And that was really hard for me. And so I'm just like, okay, if I'm going to do something like this again, what's needed to do it better.
Well, one of the things about this process is, okay, we're talking about the Aquarian age and how we need to not enforce hierarchy anymore, and it gets airy-fairy, this listen to life at the center and all these things, right? Mm-hmm. But the most basic things become so sparklingly important, so obvious. The funny thing about it, holding a group field, is that one of the things you see first is that when it's not every man for themselves, and we're holding it here instead of here, that the group has to be responsive to the most practical concerns, mm-hmm. like food, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Just eating. That was one that was dropped there, mm-hmm. and super expensive to eat by yourself in Hawaii, But then I went to that Singing Life thing, and it was just part of the container, mm-hmm. and everybody helped. It was beautiful, mm-hmm. It was all vegetarian, mm-hmm. fine, but it was great, that was held. The food part of it, anyway, was held so well, and it was just a basic thing that everybody could take for granted if you were trying to every man for themselves, Mm-hmm. So, like a group field that's trying to work together, and the group isn't interested in every member eating,
right,
and eating reasonably well. Fucked up, it doesn't work. Mm-hmm. Place, where are the people in a field? Are their basic needs met? Do they have comfort? Because whatever you're doing, beings don't work from a place of
it's really hard
fear.
To learn when your nervous system's dysregulated.
We're dysregulated. Yeah. So it's funny how I can create my own thing. I'm responsible for my own thing, whatever, and then I'm never going to be involved with the group because I'm just doing that, right? And I open up to a group field, and one of the things that has to be taught there, understood there, is that the needs and processes of the group are really important. Mm-hmm. And we aren't unselfish enough to hold that well, really. Mm-hmm. Although, in that case, right, there were a lot of people that helped, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That were in that vibe, that were in that place, that did do that. And, this is touchy because we're like, well, what if this person wasn't responsible and they didn't take care of their own food, shelter, mm-hmm. and whatever?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and I think there's also, as a parent, something that I've realized is it's not appropriate for me to expect someone to take responsibility that's above their developmental needs.
Yeah.
Especially if I'm not available to walk them through the process of becoming responsible in a way that they're not feeling shame or pressure to do so. And that's a fascinating principle to bring to a group field that's made up of adults that all have varying levels of healed trauma parts. So at some level, there could be developmental delays where they're not capable of meeting an expectation for responsibility. Mm-hmm. Like, how do you navigate that with other adults without treating them like a child? It's a real challenge, and I think a lot of people in our world right now have their eyes on, is there a better way we can do life and community and school and those kinds of things? And I think that's one of the considerations that we have to look at is, how do we make it safe to learn? How do we make sure everybody's kind of basic needs are taken care of? Because if that isn't there, everything that comes next is going to be built on some kind of distortion of looking away from the child that doesn't have food.
But then are we moving to trying to search for a utopia here where really we're so far behind that 8 ball right now? I listen to that and I think it would be great if we could get a system where no child goes hungry. Mm-hmm. That would be amazing, mm-hmm. right? But right now I would settle for like no child dies from hunger. You can be hungry, right? Or even further back than that, no child dies from a disease that could be prevented with a shot. Like where do you put the marker?
Where do you put realistic?
The mark?
Yeah, I think that could be another piece to responsibility.
Because then we're looking at, communism versus capitalism versus socialism, like political structures. Then we're also looking at financial or economic structures too, and trying to say like, what is the perfect society? And we can look at Switzerland or Holland or whatever it is that's the happiest city. I know it's one of those ones with blonde people in it. Finland, cool. We can be like, well, let's just do everything that the Finns do. And then that might work horribly here. Like, who knows?
Right.
So I
part of that is because there's actually a whole like group field thing happening there. That like you can't necessarily just transfer that to another location where the people there have entirely different experiences and memories and that kind of thing. Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, well, if I just look at the system I have now and what I can change in that system, right? I can make sure that my school has a restorative behavior plan. That my school doesn't punish, but provides consequences and learning opportunities for students or kids who make mistakes, right? And then I can go further and I can say I can also watch out for bullying and make it as safe as humanly possible to be a student at my school. That's like the field that I have. And then I have my family field, and I can say, and I can still fuck all of that up completely. I can still have a kid who is losing her ever-loving mind, being, suffering from the effects of pre-existing trauma from before I even knew she existed, and somehow that's messing up my little ones and all sorts of things that fuck up that are totally out of my control. And those are my children. So like we talk about like how to regulate another adult whose trauma makes it so that you can't see eye to eye without treating them like a child. How do I deal with my fucking child without treating her like a child, right? Like, we get into the fields of responsibility and you ask yourself the question, are you responsible to your child or to your nation? Are you responsible to make a perfect society or just make it slightly less fucked up than it is right now? And you can get into some serious feelings of inadequacy looking at questions like that. So how do I find that?
That there's also like always the temptation to create rules and dogma that can be really helpful, but they also so easily like limit the capacity of a container to serve the needs of the individuals. So yeah, I'm always kind of like watching that of like, well, we have to have this, this, and this, but then this, and this start to become more important than people in the field. And then it's not even, you lose the game altogether. Right.
The what you have to have becomes more important than the reason you decided you had to have it in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah, part of it is that we bought into individualism because it works more immediately. And to do a group field, you have to buy out of individualism. The new individualism is what works well with this field.
I look at the history of different like communities and countries and people, and you can go like Eastern versus Western or established versus non-established. Like look at Native Americans and Aboriginals and people who live in tribes in Papua New Guinea, and that family container, the community container, is so much more important. The less civilized and evolved you are, and you can't see me, but that's in severe quotation marks, right?
Right.
If what I have to worry about is making sure that people around me are fed, because the person I'm feeding is the same person that's providing me with the roof over my head and the clothes that I wear, and my job is to get the spear and hunt, or my family's constantly under attack by literal predators. I have to be able to take down the lion. And sometimes that means I'll die so that they'll be okay. When you're not prey needs community. Predators typically don't. Not the same way. I mean, lions have prides and whatever, right? But you see a lone eagle, but you see a whole flock of sparrows, right? That idea that as you are more under threat, you are more community-based because you can't survive alone, right? I don't know where I was going with that. It's left me right now, but that idea of we've kind of screwed ourselves up by making things comfortable enough that we can be really selfish.
Yeah, and it almost turns us each into predators.
Right.
Where we're each just trying to get what we can for ourselves. Yeah, that's really interesting.
I don't think it's socialistic or communistic to look into the idea that everybody being fed is a basic.
No, I agree. But I'm also kind of socialist.
Yeah.
But I agree, but I know that those kinds of things are trigger words for our
a lot of
audience.
We hit this, a lot of people fear leaving individualism, but it's not that you leave the individual, it's just that you leave that as the main consideration, if that makes sense. So if I'm responsible to life and I'm looking at a group field, and I just imagine just any community, your little subdivision here, or any downtown block of Salt Lake City. What if people were in communication with each other? Do you know how much extra food there is? How much people throw away?
Yeah.
We could so easily feed people. And people are like, well, that would make them lazy and they wouldn't work as hard. And I just think that's exactly the opposite. If I know that the people around me care enough, right, to ensure that I'm fed, I am included in this block, and therefore I'm fed. My heart goes into, how do I help?
Exactly.
How do I help? And I think that's the most human thing.
And what drives me crazy, right, is the other idea of I have to do everything for myself to get as high as I can possibly get.
Yeah.
And I'm like, do you understand if you are standing at ground level and I'm on top of a cliff and we both jump, I don't give a shit how good of an aerial you have, I jumped higher than you. Right? So this idea that we have to be alone to get the most wealthy or the best off we can be is ridiculous, because someone in Africa trying to survive and doing everything they can can't Elon Musk their way into space. Right? So it is the society around us that makes it possible for us to achieve greatness. So this idea of me separate from them is, to me, baffling.
Yeah, it is baffling. It's not the thing, and I think there are. Here's the thing. I think when we move into those kinds of things, and we hold the group as important as ourselves, there are people who will misuse it.
Yeah.
And part of being responsible is to see it and to have a function to call that out. I think that's another thing that groups do that are really successful is they meet often and they share honestly. Part of responsibility is to know what's happening, So, in our last summer's California experience, the only container we had is, hey, let's meet at 10 and see what's going on. And then people could share what was present with them. And sometimes it was bullshit, but then other people would be like, okay, I don't see it that way, but it's okay, that attuned the group, even if people didn't come to any kind of agreement on what they should do. They never did something different, right? It's a listening process. Something there. It doesn't involve power. That's the thing that socialism and capitalism get wrong. You can't power people into a group. You can't make them be good or make them share. a group of people have to decide to serve life in a way, and they have to decide that the world they want to live in is coherent.
Absolutely.
That it will work that way. And I think so many people are ready to make this choice, and so many people don't know how to do it, and how to really get out of the structures of capitalism that drive us apart from each other and into something else. But I think there are a lot of interesting people that are experimenting with community, that are experimenting with different structures of being and ways of being, and it's worth trying.
Yeah.
Even if it's
and I think all those people did
irresponsible.
Did some stuff wrong. They probably had moments that they were like, "This is the worst idea ever."
This is the dumbest.
Diplomacy in the classroom is not workable. But no, I remember where I was going with that. It just came to me as Steve was talking. I was trying to connect it to last episode, and the idea of the galactic nature of consciousness and aliens and right? And right now we're top shit on the food chain. I mean, America's not really, whatever. You can argue whatever you want, but the most civilized nations are the ones that have no predators, right? Eventually, whether it is a predator or just a bigger being than us that we discover, we're not going to be the top of the totem pole anymore, right? Right now, we're in 6th grade, and we're like, we're king shit.
Yeah.
Love that.
Right.
And come August, come September, we're going to be like, oh, fuck. I'm so little.
I'm so
little.
You love
Especially if you get into a charter school that has seniors in it, like, oh my God, they're tiny, right? Anyway, but that's where I'm going with that. So as we talked about the increased agitation and the increased movement in the world and in individual lives and blah, 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 as we discover more and more outside of ourselves, and humanity becomes, if not prey, at least smaller than it is now, not the most advanced society in the universe, then patterns from animals to native peoples and up, then at least allude to the idea that that's going to force us into more of that community mindset, right? And so it's like capitalism is only sustainable if you are the biggest thing around. If you're the best thing there is. Once something bigger than you comes along, you're going to be asking for that handout too,
Yeah.
or that help. Anyway, sorry.
I think that's amazing.
I'll forget it again if I don't.
I love it so much.
It was really good.
Even just as a micro analogy to go along with the idea of human consciousness evolving from Earth-centric to sun-centric to black hole-centric is 6th grade to 7th grade. I love it so much.
Yep. I love watching that. And now there's this new trend in Utah to make 6th grade part of middle school, and it's fucking hilarious because those kids don't know what the fuck to do with
They're
themselves.
so tiny.
They were prepared to be the king shit, and they forgot when they were in 5th grade they weren't going to be king shit next year, and now they're little fish. They're like, we didn't get to be cool. Everyone else thinks it's hilarious.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
So eventually, the high school equivalent bully is going to come around, and we're not going to realize that we're not 6th grade anymore. We're not king anymore. Anyway.
Yeah.
I just tie everything back to education and family.
I like this.
Yeah.
Well, when I want to, because I want to come back to something that I've just been kind of sitting with is, you guys have talked a little bit about teaching and classrooms and stuff, and I'm just curious, Keith, if you would say that that every class has a personality.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. Every class has a culture, and every class has a history and has a context, and every class is made up of immigrants. If you really want to go, make it big, right, and you think about your class, every one of those kids a year ago were in different classes with different kids in different societies and different cultures. So every time I walk into a classroom, I have to meet a whole new being again. Even if I know each and every one of those students individually, I'm coming in and introducing myself to this classroom, which is its own beast, right? And it's been kind of wild being now a vice principal. I don't have a classroom anymore. I have a school, right? and that school is a being, and I had to introduce myself to that school being when I first got there. But every time I go into a classroom to observe, I'm meeting a new thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I cover a class or I teach a class, and I'm like, this is not like when I had my own classroom, when I could control the culture, when I could have the couch in the corner and the rules on the wall that I liked.
Well, and even just the day-to-day interaction and listening and knowing the individuals and
And so I'm walking into these classes and I'm discovering aliens, but then I'm also discovering similarities. So I work in a STEM school right now, right? That is the furthest thing from the liberal arts school that I started teaching in Utah at. Yeah. And I walked into an English class the other day and they were reading Jurassic Park, 9th grade, reading Jurassic Park. And they were having a simulation or a discussion about the idea of funding Jurassic Park. And they didn't know the Socratic method. They didn't know the types of questions. They didn't know dialectic versus heuristic or who Socrates was or any of that stuff that I learned at Paradigm. But they still asked questions and they still challenged ideas and they still they still had passion and curiosity. And I was like, yeah, this is an alien to me. But it's still a water-based life form, to use a Project Hail Mary idea, right? There's still something in here that I can connect to, that I can see. We had a fantastic discussion that would have totally had a place at Paradigm in an English class over there. We could have been talking about any classic, right? But it was a completely different school, a completely different set of kids. And it was just so interesting to see the alien and the family within the same being.
Yeah, I really wanted to bring that in because I feel like that is possibly a very visceral lived experience of you of a group field. And how it's like a being. It has a personality. It's something that you're interacting with that's different than a group of individuals. There's there's a field there that you get to interact with. And I think, where we're going with, this whole season is the question of what is it like to listen there and interact with whatever the field is that we're in, and maybe even possibly the next larger field that this field is a part of, and what's possible when we move a little bit out of the dogma and rules and systems and institutions field that we've been in, and go into what's actually the living being that's here, and how do I listen to it, and how do I be with it in real time? Because you might have had the same lessons every day with these different classes on the same subject, and you get a different group of kids in there, and you have to interact in real time, even teaching the same curriculum.
Every teacher knows how this is. Because you will have the same lesson for the same genetic mix of people, and it will go completely different. And if it doesn't, then 9 times out of 10 the reason it hasn't is because you are overly controlling that space's energy. If you can give a lesson the same way 4 times in a day to 4 different classes, it's because you aren't letting that class breathe. And so teachers are like, oh, all my classes are on the same page. And I'm like, why? What did you do?
It's not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah, it'd be like the the Von Trapp family, and the kids are all lined up on the stairs, and they look like little clones of each other, and they're all singing in harmony and bouncing up and down. I'm like, what the fuck? Where is the individual personality? But every teacher knows what you're talking about. But so does every parent. You walk into your house after a long day of work, or you walk into a classroom and the energy is off, and you can't point to whose energy is off, but the collective's energy is off. And usually it's there's a few people in there who had a really bad day, and the rest of the whole the whole being that is the classroom or the family unit is having a bad day. And you can walk into a class and it can feel somber, or it can feel excited, or it can feel angry or agitated, or and it's not that these people feel that way, it's that this whole space has that feeling throughout it.
Yeah. One of the things that was really revealed to us in our California experience is the power of every single dyad in any group field is also contributing to the field. And as the days went on that we were there, the more spaciousness in the field for us to have a one-on-one interaction, even if it was just a small one-on-one interaction with each person, the more cohesiveness there was in the field. And if there was, we had a couple of people there that work with businesses this way, and one of the things that they've discovered is like most of the time when there was something big going on in the organization, it's because one or two of the dyads in the field were off and hadn't been addressed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Individual conflicts lead to a group in cohesion.
And it's interesting because it's not certain types that do this. Like, it's not just your loud people or your quiet people, but it's always your big energy people that have the most effect. Like, if I walk into a class, there's always one or two people in the room that can affect the energy of 30 kids, and I know I'm one of those people. Like, I come in with energy, I have big energy. Even if I'm trying to be quiet, I have big energy, right? And so it's interesting to me because that's not a tangible thing. If I'm walking in a crowd in New York City and I'm dressed like everyone around me, you might not be able to pick me out of the crowd, but when you meet me and talk to me or someone else with this kind of energy field, it's not tangible, but it's felt, right? And like, that's one of the greatest, like, the idea of energy work, you guys have used that term for years, right? For as long as I've known you. But I feel like I've been doing energy work since the moment I stepped into the world, right? But especially like when I was a teacher, I used to say all the time, like, I don't believe in classroom management, I have energy management, right? Like, I'm not managing a classroom, I'm managing this field of energy of the class. And the first way I do that is like my entrance, whereas some teachers can enter a room and no one even notices. That literally never happens for me, right? So it's this thing of like, some people can pretend and bury their head in the sand that energy is not a thing. And I'm like, but it is. You just call it something different, like charisma or charm or something like that,
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, and ultimately that's why we want to work with groups. Is because group presence it trumps individual presence. So cohesion within a group is there, but like, when there's an activation in 6 or 7 people, right? Then there's a kind of life that's contagious. And I always said in the classroom, if I could get 3 kids really, really interested,
that's all you need,
right? That's all you need. If I get 5 kids, done deal, right? And I couldn't always do that. Unfortunately, it's not always there. But often, and I would pay attention to those kids because they had the spark, because a group energy is interesting. It's what we want. We want connection. Connection, in fact, is the reality, and we build up processes that keep us out of connection because
those walls,
because we're afraid of it. Yeah, and the whole reason to do this, it reframes your original question. It reframes responsibility, right? It's no longer, how can I meet this group or whatever and meet the needs or not meet the needs? How can I meet things with meeting the needs or not meeting the needs? It's, what is my place? Like, that becomes a responsibility.
Yeah, and it comes back to like really breaking down that word.
Yeah.
Am I available to respond to the life that's happening right here in the moment? And if I'm not, what do I need to do to get to a place where I can be there? And I know for myself, that's where I am always the most effective. Is that if I'm paying close enough attention, I'm listening well enough, and I'm personally resourced enough that I can meet what's here in real time, with my fullness.
The great thing about that too is when you can do that, you're also opening yourself up to be responded to.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, when I do have the resources, when I am, you know, fulfilled and able to share out and respond to the world, then there comes a time that I'm not. That I don't have what it takes. I'm under-resourced, I'm overworked, I'm exhausted, and that same community then gives back to me. So I had the most beautiful experience with this. You know, like I'm going through some family stuff right now with people back home, and I had to like just at the drop of a hat leave work for 5 weeks, right? And I have been giving everything I've got to my family and to this new job because I'm like, I just can't. I'm loving it. I love being here. Da, da, da. And I've been doing that and just been like, this is just how I am. You know, you both probably know this by now, but Steve knows it especially. When I throw myself into something, I don't have a break. I just, all of it goes in, right? But I was doing that and da, da, da. And this thing came up and I went to my boss who I had spoken to, you know, a few dozen times since I started there. And I was like, here's the situation. I only have 1 week of paid leave, but I need to be gone for 5 weeks. He's like, well, take 2 weeks of paid leave, take as much time as you want. The full 5 weeks is fine. Your job will be here for you when you get back. We're all praying for you. We're all hoping for you. And the rest of my administration team banded together and took care of my load while I was gone. The teachers banded together and took care of what I was responsible for. I barely got an email. I'm a vice principal. I get 30, 40 emails a day. I barely got an email.
Wow.
The whole time I was gone. And more often than not, the emails I did get were thinking of you, praying for you, hoping things are okay. From this place that I've been working at for, 6 months before this all went down. And it was the most beautiful example of I had been open to this place and was giving to this place, and the place received me and gave back to me when I couldn't give anymore. And people who think that they can make it alone and that they're only responsible for themselves, they're the ones who get fucked when things like that happen. Because then they look around and they've got no one to lift them up when they're down, So to me, it's like community is a basic need. It's survival instinct. It is the need to make sure every kid's being fed. Because it's that fundamental thing. You cannot survive alone. Like maybe there's a few people who can do that. There's a lot of training that goes into it. Good for them. I'm not one of them. I need people, right? Anyway.
Yeah, this is kind of like to cap this off. I'm thinking about the very practical aspects of being with groups, the biological need, the evolutionary need, the way that groups ignite each other, etc. But also, all of that is held in an collective unconscious process. A group has unseen connections that have unseen connections that have unseen connections. So really the thing is like to be aware on the surface and to be thinking about all those other things and to be working with them through them and responsive. But there's a deeper listening too. There's a deeper process to hear what isn't said. To be with what isn't often noticed. And, you get a sense of it. You do. Ask any mother and they'll tell you how their kids are, even if they're not talking to them, Often they'll have a sense of things that is a deeper sense. It's not just noticing what's happening. So, yeah, I really honor responsibility on that sense. Responsibility to...
Yeah, and it's interesting that, Keith and I were both gone for a long time in the last couple of months.
Yeah.
And, my thing was 6 weeks. And there were moments of grace like that for me as well, where I would have a friend reach out of the blue and just say, hey, I think you need some money. Check your Venmo. We haven't even talked for a couple of months.
Wow.
But he was listening.
Yeah.
And... like the precision of that moment and when it landed and like the crisis that I was in was just like, yeah, there's something happening here that people are listening to, and so grateful. There were multiple moments like that where somebody, reached out where I was just at my wit's end, and somebody's just like, hey, I care, and that got me through the next day of craziness.
That's beautiful.
Thank you for joining us today. And for this season, I feel like it's been really wonderful and unique. And we would love to invite you to bring questions to our podcast. And if you feel like you would like to appear on the podcast, we'd love to have guests. And please like, share, and subscribe, and look for us at soulandspiritwellness.com.